Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Learn Partimento podcast. I am so thrilled to have a wonderful guest today. Today, I have conductor, harpsichordist, and organist Patrick Ayrton. He is a wonderful improvising musician, professor, and we're going to talk a lot about his work as a teacher, his performances, and his recordings. And we're going to really dive into the pedagogy that I'm so interested in, which is how to improvise, how to learn counterpoint, and so many things. So, Patrick, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Nick. Very honored, very happy to be with you.
Well, there's so much to start with, and there's so much material to cover, but maybe we could just take a couple of minutes and introduce yourself to the audience and just give a little bit about your background and what kind of the things you've been working on in your area of expertise.
Well, as you mentioned, I play keyboards. I started with playing actually the organ quite young. That I didn't want to play piano like every single other kid in my class, and I got very interested in other forms of keyboards. I was quite blessed because by the fact that my godmother was a famous violinist in Switzerland. I'm British, but I grew up in Switzerland my father went to work there, and so I grew up in the French part of Switzerland. So I grew up bilingual. And my godmother was quite a famous violinist. She was actually the first the concertmeister of the Orchestre de la Suisse Romande, and she had done stuff with Stravinsky and De Falla, and a quite extraordinary woman. She one day said to me, "Oh, if you're going to play the Poulenc concerto, I can tell you how to do that because I did it with him." And if you're going to play the De Falla concerto, no problem, because we played it together, and so I know his tempi. Anyway, her daughter was a famous harpsichordist, Christiane Jacotet, one of the grandes dames of the harpsichord world, who lived in Switzerland and taught her whole career in Geneva. Our families were linked, and that's the way I got to be exposed to the harpsichord. And I started playing organ, and then I went to Vienna, studied organ in Vienna. Later, harpsichord with Ton Koopman in Holland. And at one point, I was asked whether I would like to be his assistant at The Hague, and that's what I did. I became his assistant. But then I got a bit I got a bit tired, to be honest, of teaching repertoire, and I got more and more interested in how are pieces made in the organic, the molecular side, even the atomic side of pieces. Well, how are they made, and how can one here and now recreate them? How can one compose here and now? For me, I don't see very much difference. Well, this is debatable, of course, but I don't see very much difference between composition and improvisation. I mean, improvisation is composition here and now. That's all.
Right.
If you want to improvise, you obviously have to know the rules of composition.
Yes.
Otherwise, how do you improvise? In fact, the great one of the great organists of France. I live in France now, and the great organists of Notre-Dame de Paris, Cochereau was his name, Pierre Cochereau. He said, "L'improvisation n'existe pas," and in a way, I can understand what he means by that. You learn composition, and you learn how you prepare your improvisations. And then I discovered, bit by bit, that, well, in order to improvise, you need to know about counterpoint.
Yes.
And you need to know about harmony. But there was a missing link, which I discovered much later. There was that missing link between counterpoint and harmony and the blank page. That means, just delving into an improvisation. And that is Partimento. That is when I discovered that missing link.
Can I ask you, when was that point that you felt frustrated with only learning and or rather just teaching repertoire. What year was that? And when you really felt like I need to perhaps dive into the music, as you said, in a molecular level?
Well, it's funny we're doing this interview today, Nikhil, because last week I got a really nice call from my boss in The Hague. He's new. He's replaced a previous one. And he said, I got this call and I thought, okay, right, he probably has a lot of administrative things to tell me and this and that. And he said, "Hi, Patrick, I'm just calling you for one thing, to congratulate you." And I said, "Oh, that's very kind, thank you. Why? You've been teaching here for 25 years. Today, 25 years ago, you signed your contract." And it made me feel at the same time, quite old, and at the same time, very happy. And it indeed, I've been teaching for 25 years.
That's fantastic. What an achievement.
Well, I am quite proud. I just hung in there, traveling, because I don't live in Holland. We're going up and down, but then communications got better. Trains went fast. They built a high-speed line between Paris and Brussels, and now it's almost high speed up to Rotterdam and this and that. I mean, Europe is not so difficult to travel through north from north to south, or vice versa. West east is another question. That is more difficult in Europe because of the geography. But anyway, so I think to answer your question, I started 25 years ago, and I must have taught for about. So I started indeed in 96, and I think I must have taught for about 10 years solo. So that brings us to about 2006, and that's when yes, I mean, I don't dislike teaching repertoire, and in fact I do teach a little bit of repertoire, but when I teach a lesson of repertoire, I get completely carried away by the compositional side of it. Mind you, it is important for interpretation. If interpreting a piece, you need to know about why the composer wrote it in that way.
Yeah, I often wonder that somebody said something in a previous interview talking about Chopin, and he said that with that understanding of counterpoint and dissonances. Because a lot of people just play repertoire, they like a train. They just go right through a piece, and like with a metronome, but sometimes there's different weights on certain points, and there's certain stresses on certain areas, and pulling back and stronger and accents, and perhaps that is stronger if you have a composer's or improviser's insight.
Yes, I think so. Because being an improviser with your I don't see a big difference between a composer and improviser, but between composing and improvising. So for me, if you want to improvise, you need to know the rules of composition. So and when you're going to compose in a certain way, well, you're looking for certain effects, aren't you? And so it's the blank page. You're sitting there and you say, "Oh, right. Well, maybe I'm going to do I don't know, a three down, one up. I'll do that." And as soon as you've decided that, well, that opens a whole world, doesn't it? Or I'm a Baroque composer and I decide now I'm going to do a 5 up, 4 down. Well, that immediately opens the whole question of dissonances and preparation and resolutions, because I'm going to do these kind of things. And so any decision, any compositional decision, a step you take opens a whole world and opens not only from a technical point of view, but from an affect, the point of view of affect, because if you're going to use dissonances, you're going to express something quite powerful, aren't you? More than if you're using consonances.
Let's get into your way of doing this, and it's interesting because in this wonderful field, there's so many brilliant people who teach thorough bass, Partimento, and everyone has a unique way of doing it. And there's a lot of parallels and oversights, a lot of parallels and overlaps. And you mentioned for instance, I guess some people would consider what you played a Monte Romanesca, but I don't know. I mean, again, people have different terms, right? So I'm curious, how do you use the strict numbers then for an example like that? Is that something you would just use? Just, you know what? I'm just the number up, the number down, and how would you, in your mind, how do you organize that information?
Well, I usually, for the sake of clarity, will use terms like 3 down, 1 up, 4 up, 3 down. But I have to tell you, I'm a complete fan and total fan of Gerdingen's research, his books, wonderful book of music and the Gallant style. I think you are too
a fan for sure.
If not an addict, and his extraordinary book, which is more recent, on the Neapolitan Conservatories, and I've been very happy. That was quite interesting. I have Rudolf Lutz to thank, the great master of improvisation in Switzerland.
Maybe Patrick, why don't we start in the progression for you, and we can see how it all came together. Let's get into story time.
I think it's interesting because, as I said before, that, and then I'll tell you about the terminology I use. But now I could just say, and we can come back to that, is that I tend to use 3 down, 1 up, these like that. And indeed, when I read Gerdingen, I saw that he sort of extended the Fonte Monte Ponte thing into vocabulary which he just invented himself, didn't he? I mean, quite a lot of and he coined them in such a brilliant way that they have now become, I would say, a kind of lingua franca, a kind of international. The other day, I met someone who was talking about, who mentioned quiescenza. You know, I didn't even know that this was something which had been coined by Germany. You know, so I was a quiescenza, and it made me laugh because this was we owe him a real revolution in this field. So to explain how things started, when I decided, in fact, in The Hague, there was not really a functional, back in around beginning of the year 2000. Now, I don't mean this in any negative way. It's a fantastic school, The Hague. I mean, when you think at one point it was really, that's where it was all happening. You had Basel and The Hague. You had the Kauken brothers, and you had extraordinary. I would say the first generation of these pioneers of the rediscovery of Baroque music. Right. Now they've all retired now. We have a new generation. But I was a student myself, and I studied there. But to be honest, there was not really a functional, viable, well organized continuo class for continuo.
Right.
It was an attitude in Holland where you just learn continuo, learn it as you go. And I thought there's something wrong here.
What was the? I'm sorry. I'm very curious because since we're at that particular point in the history, can I just quickly ask what was the perception around learning continuo and improvisation in the classical world at that point?
At that point, I felt very much that continuo was still. I remember Ton Koopman saying to me that when he was a student, so that goes back, even further, people were amazed. People saying, playing continuo, that must be very hard. That's something, only accessible to the chosen few. Playing from that must be really, really very hard. And it was a little bit that attitude. When I started my studies in Holland in 85, there was a bit sort of this attitude that, it was something only for the really good ones, not anybody could play continuo. And so it was, the tuition of continuo was a little bit disorganized, if I may say. I won't mention any names, but it was, you would go and grab an idea here and grab an idea there, and there was nothing really structural and viable about it. And many harpsichordists thought, oh, continuo, that's not for me. I'm talking about continuo, not even improvisation.
Right.
I'm not even there yet. And as for improvisation, no one improvised.
Was the book by C.P.E. Bach, his True Art, was that book considered one of the sources at that time, before all this Partimento and all of that? What were the books that people were turning to at that point?
Well, to be honest, there were not many. There are some books out there, and there's some really extraordinary chapters, like the chapter in Niedt, Niedd, on how to improvise suites. Now, that chapter, to be honest, I only discovered it much later. A Swiss friend of mine sent me a scan of it. There's a very good English translation by someone whose name I can't remember. But and I thought, wow, I didn't know this existed. And the 42nd or 43rd, I've got very bad memory, chapter in Carl Philip's book on how to improvise free fantasies. That was also something which I was, to be honest, never told about, and sort of had to discover for myself. But there again, I'm talking about, there you are. I think that's the Niedt, the musical guide, indeed. Now, that is an extraordinary book and quite unique when you think of that chapter on how to improvise suites, and so logical, because basically he's using a Partimento, isn't he? Using a bass. And he says, well, you can do this, you can do that. And so this is something I recommend. Well, my students all work on Niedt, and this is, we make all kinds of puns on Niedt, how neat it is. But to come back to your question, in around those years, no one thought, well, continuo was considered hard. No one was talking, there you are, that's the bass, that's the Niedt bass, which is so neat. No, it's fine. But yeah, there you are. I mean, just this opening gambit is so wonderful with a... it's a bit small, I can't read it. I should know it by heart. I should know it by heart. But this bass, I recommend, I say, all scholars, just use this bass and see how many things you can do on it in terms of just simple continuo,
yep.
Or something more elaborate, a kind of Partimento, and then move on to complete improvisation where you memorize the bass and you try and invent your own basses.
Right.
Yes. So Niedt is a must. So back to your question, around, I would say, the beginning of the when I founded my continuo Partimento and improvisation class in The Hague, lots of people were very shy about even continuo. So I'm not even talking about improv.
And it wasn't, at least from what I'm getting from you, at least it wasn't negative. So it wasn't something that was, how can you do this? This is a terrible idea. This is disrespectful. I've heard some horror stories, but at least that sounds quite positive.
No, it was when people were shy about it, it was fascinated. They would come up to me and say, do you think I could play continuo? And I said, my answer to that was, but of course you can't imagine. If you take the book by Jean-François Dandrieu, which I use to start people on basso continuo. Why do I use that? Because we're in 1719, starting with something earlier, even Muffat, which is great, I think is a little bit too early, and starting with something later than that is a bit too late. You see what I mean? I think it's it's a perfect time in music history. It's a great, pragmatic, well-written, clear, and user-friendly continuo school. And I use Dandrieu, and in fact, it's my nickname. I'm called Patrick Dandrieu Ayrton in The Hague, and it's even the password to get to my agenda. So you can sign it with a lesson. You do Dandrieu 7 on the Gmail card. You can book a lesson. Anyway, the thing is, I like Dandrieu because it's just he's wonderful. He starts. You have one page with.
I'm not sure if I have the right one, but is this the right one?
If you have the one from IMSLP, that's fine. Unfortunately, the person who scanned this got rid of the third page, and that was a very stupid thing to do because Dandrieu has one page which he calls La Table, which he explained. So he explained you play the bass, and you play the sonorities in the order they are written, and that is something extremely important. Yeah. And then you go up 5, and wow, you've already discovered so many things. Contrary movement, voice leading, just in that half cadence, we could call it. I mean, we could talk hours about just this, Then,
as long as you want to stay here, Patrick, we can do it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm free, and
so Dandrieu, that's wonderful, and so this is pre-Partimento, and you're still using it today because it's so effective.
Yeah, I'm a great fan of this, and then I like the way he introduces bit by bit the rule of the octave, doesn't he? We could just climb up, and then etc. And of course, in the 3 positions and all that, as I said, user-friendly. My answer to all these people who are doubting Thomas's, and who are thinking, oh, continuo, how hard, how difficult. You think I could do that? I said, well, why does I repeat myself, I'm sorry, user-friendly, pragmatic book such as Dandrieu, why was it so popular? Because so many people just sat down and learned it, and that's all. You just learn it, and then you apply what you learn in Dandrieu to a concert royal by Couperin or whatever, and there's no difference. What you learn in Dandrieu, you apply. I think people were very pragmatic back then. You learn the theory and you apply it with no chichi to the practice, to the practical side. So I started doing that. In fact, when I decided to found my own class of continuo, having taught repertoire for quite some time, I was a little bit worried. I thought, how am I going to do this? I had to bluff my way a little bit, to be honest. I told my boss, I'd like to start, I would like to, I'd like to create.
It didn't appear that there was a systematic historical source that you could draw from in the complete sense. It seemed like a lot of people had to put stuff together from all little pieces here and there to make a system, because at the time, I guess the scholarship wasn't at a point where it was so concentrated or as quite flourishing as it is kind of today.
Absolutely. We when you compare today the number of extraordinary books which have come out. I mean, this is also. I think Christensen's book was out around then. It could be actually a little bit early. I think again, I'm bad at dates, but Christensen's book was a breakthrough, where he explains on one page. He explains Dandrieu, says use Dandrieu or use Saint-Lambert, or use Deleuze or any other. And so that Dandrieu saved my life. I started teaching Dandrieu, and the kids were fascinated. They enjoyed it so much. And I had also some students coming in who were not even harpsichordists, who had done a bit of piano. One of my best continuo, one of my very best students is a Baroque violinist from Finland called Tuomo Suni. And he learnt continuo in a few lessons. And then he was being asked to accompany people's exams. Sorry, I'm a violinist. No, but you play so well. And, and I have other examples like that. And that's when I realized, wow, there's a way of just learning continuo. And of course, you can expand this then to, I'm not going to start with Heineken or Matteson or things like that. That's where I would say that's when you've done a little bit of basic continuo for a while, and then you expand it, and then you go backwards. You work on Muffat. Unfortunately, we don't have very many sources from Italy, virtually none for the 17th century in Italy. But Muffat can help, and of course Ragazzari and Bianciardi and others for Italy. And then for the later, well, read Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, extraordinary book on continuo playing.
Can I ask you those? I'm very curious about those success stories, and I love the fact that you mentioned a student who had a great success or really benefited from that. Do you have more anecdotes that you can share that students who learned basso continuo from you, and you could really see them grow as they took lessons in this art of improvisation and accompaniment, and you really enjoyed seeing them develop under your tutelage?
Well, again, I think I don't want to sound. I want to stay as modest as possible, but I do get wonderful. One of my students, Anthony Abu Hamad, who is now teaching continuo in Sydney, and writing actually a wonderful doctoral thesis on Partimento in Salzburg. I don't know if it's at what stage it is now, but I think it's on the verge of being published. He once wrote to me and said, "Patrick, I cannot thank you. I cannot thank you enough for having made me work on Dandrieu, because there's a whole new generation of kids here in Australia who are feeding on this, and they're completely passionate. Everybody's playing continuo now. Everybody can play continuo. Isn't this great?" That's one story. And many times because there was this attitude, and again, I don't want to be. I don't mean this in any negative way. I'll tell you a very nice anecdote. Do you know? I started my musical studies in Vienna. I was 19. I went to Vienna to study organ and to become an organ scholar, to study church music. So I learned Gregorian chant, and I had a bit of piano and some choir conducting, composition, and all kinds of stuff. And I had continuo. Now, my continuo teacher was a lady called Frau Cerha, Gertraud Cerha, Frau Cerha, Cerha, if I'm not mistaken, Cerha. Now, the name Cerha rang a bell. I love the Second Viennese School. I'm a great fan of Schoenberg, Berg, and Webern, and I suddenly remembered that there was a Cerha who had finished Alban Berg's opera Lulu. He'd written the third act, Alban Berg having passed away, and this lady was his wife. She, as a very and so I am told that they are still alive, almost in the I think they've almost reached 100 years old. And Frau Cerha gave me my first continuo lesson, and it was pure 4-voice accompaniment: soprano, alto, tenor. You need your 4 voices. You don't lose a voice. When I lost a voice, I said, "Hey, what's happened here?" and use your voice. So we did endless Bach stuff. I don't know. very strict, and I was, yeah, there she is. Yes. Is it Gertrude or Gertraud or Waltraud?
Gertrude, Gertraud.
It moves me enormously, Nick, that you are showing this photograph. I still have here a little book with Bach chorales, harmonizing Bach chorales. By the way, she's the first one who told me about this. With this, I think it's Carl Philipp, or is it Forkel? I think it's Carl Philipp. Was it my father used to, the way he taught continuo? Well, he would use chorales, with the melody and the bass, and you had to find the middle voices, and then the next step was to invent your own basses and this and that. And she was the first one to get me going on this, and I just find it wonderful that because she herself was a she was not a student of Alban Berg, but I think she must have been a very, very young girl if she'd met Alban Berg. But I always like to tell the story that I learned my first lessons of continuo with somebody who was very close to the second Viennese school. And I'm infinitely indebted to her. Yep. The whole logic and sanity and freshness of this four voice accompaniment has become, I would say, one of the most important dimensions of my life. And another beautiful story which happened to me is I am very interested in jazz, but I'm very frustrated. I started jazz late in life, and I'm still not at the level I would like to be. But I started taking lessons with my colleague on the same floor, the next room in The Hague. Brilliant guy. He teaches keyboard jazz keyboard harmony, and he teaches this for all the
Franz
jazz.
Elsen?
Yeah, no, not Franz Elsen, a student of Franz Elsen. This is Erik Gieben. Erik Gieben. Gieben, and he's absolutely a lovely fellow. My colleague were about the same age. I think he has been there for 25 years as well, I think. And we met in the corridor one day, and we introduced us. We'd seen each other, and then I said to him, I'd love some jazz lessons. He said to me, I would love some continuo and Partimento lessons. And I said, well, isn't that cool? So we started. My first lesson, I had to play some jazz chords. Was a revelation, because I played some exercises which he assigned, and he looked at me and said, "Oh, Patrick, there seems to be a misunderstanding here. I have to tell you, in jazz we think in a very linear way, very horizontally. We think in terms of soprano, alto, tenor, bass. Right?" And I said, "What?" He said, yes, yeah, because I always thought that jazz was, sort of like sort of vertical chords, right, which you play in any old way, Yeah. I had no idea. I had never studied the theory of jazz. He said, oh, no, voice leading, dissonances, resolved downwards and stuff like that. I just felt like hugging him. I thought, this is quite extraordinary. Right. What's the difference then?
That's interesting, because then he sounds like an incredible teacher, because I do know your initial perception of jazz education is actually quite popular, that vertical orientation. I think your initial suspicion was right for other teachers, but this Erik Gieben sounds very skilled. Sounds like he has the right ideas.
I think anybody signing up now in The Hague for undergraduate, I think they should look up Erik.
Actually, the Hague is a very special place in the jazz world because now everyone is very much. There's a very famous jazz teacher from New York called Barry Harris, who was he and his videos where he was in the Hague have become incredibly popular. I mean, they if you go onto his videos of there's him teaching giant steps. I think he's in the Hague and he's teaching. And I was wondering, did you ever get a chance to meet him, or were you around at that time?
I was not around. I think it was I could. It maybe it was in. Is there a date there, Nick? Do you see a date?
I think it says here between 1989 and 1998.
Between 90, yeah. Well, I was myself a student there from 85 to 90, and then I started teaching in 96.
Okay.
So it can be that it can be that we. But he was Barry Harris was a very good friend of Frans Elsen, and Frans Elsen was a great. Now, Eric, my teacher, is probably sitting there in the back. I can't really see, but basically, Frans Elsen was an extraordinary pedagogue and player. He passed away sadly, and Eric has told me a lot about him, and I have here his jazz method. It's in 2 volumes, and I'm bit by bit making my way through it and trying to understand. It's very complex. I never suspected that jazz theory would be as complex as that. Make some of our stuff, continuo, partimento, really, really easy.
Let's turn now to specifically the stuff that we all love and talked about. We had a great introduction about third bass, and you mentioned Dandrieu, and let's really get into some finer details now. Do you have, for people who have questions, let's say they're thinking, if I were to have lessons with Professor Patrick Ayrton, how would he guide me the long term? What's the long term path? Like, so there's Dandrieu, and is there more? Were there other things that you throw in? And I would just love to know what other stuff you throw in your course of teaching improvisation.
Well, yes. What I'm going to start with, of course, is continuo, because if you go back to that example you showed from Niedt school, the musical guide. Well, you have a bass and you have figures, don't you? And if you look at Partimenti, well, you have the numerati and the numerati and the diminuiti. So the 2 first books by Fenaroli have figures. So you need to know how to learn from figures, and that's where Dandrieu is extremely helpful. As I said, you can move to other schools. I think just learning. You could use any schools. Just learning how figures work. It could be even the wonderful little instructions by Bach, which he wrote at the end of the little book for Anna Magdalena Bach. It could be anything. It's after all, it's international. It's a 6 is a 6, whether you are in Stockholm or Rome or
is it true? Is it truly the same? So if I were to use Niedt, if I were to use Dandrieu, if I were to use C.P.E. Bach, are they 90% similar? Are they 80% similar? Are they 99% similar? Are there differences between perhaps countries, the French style, the German style, the Italian style?
Of course there are differences, Nick. Of course there are differences. But you see, I don't believe, I believe in learning the basic vocabulary. And of course there are differences. I mean, if you look at German schools, French schools, but it's the same language. These differences are going to be questions of style, whether you're going to double things in the left hand, positions, if you're going to play high, play low, this and that. These are, I would say, things which are very useful when you're going to start deciding, well, what repertoire am I going to play? But as I say at the beginning, a 7 is a 7. Seven will resolve as long as we live in this world as we see it. A seven will have to be prepared and resolve downwards. That's all. And this is what interests me so much. It's I would say the contrapuntal aspect of harmony. As you know, there's this wonderful. I think it was Bob Jerdingen who coined the wonderful sentence that the harmony is a fairy tale told by Counterpoint.
Yep.
We were remembering together with Peter von Tour the other day in a nice chat. I'm in touch with Peter, who I respect immensely. I know who you have interviewed him too.
One of the greats.
He's great. Anyway, but I you see, starting with Dandrieu explains to you so many things about. You discover so much. You discover about things about voice leading. You discover the rule of the octave. You discover all kinds of things about preparation, action, and resolution of dissonance, what I call PAR.
Say that again.
It's what I call PAR.
Okay.
PAR is preparation, action, resolution. Like... So, preparation, action, resolution. So these simple mechanisms, which are in Dandrieu, if you look at it now, the horizontally, like Eric Gieben was telling me about jazz, he said, look at it horizontally. All this is in there, so you could spend a whole day analyzing a page of Dandrieu. But of course, all this there's so many ramifications, and then of course you can discover so many more aspects of continuo playing by reading schools from different masters. I mean, if you take Germany, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books on basso continuo. And if you take France as well, Italy, a few, not as many, but it takes a lifetime to go through all this. But I would say my aim, I like preparing I'm not a teacher. I would say I can teach, I think I can teach advanced students, but I love students who are just at the very beginning. I love working with students at the very beginning of their discovery of basso continuo.
That's like almost everyone, I think, right? In the classical world, we're seeing this huge renaissance and interest, and there's a ton of people who are just discovering it. And so I think you are the right person to talk to then. So, okay, I have a bunch of questions related to that. Let's say, and people starting at the very beginning. So they might ask, the first question is, and you might have already answered it, 4 voices like Bach taught. But some teachers say, what about also having that melodic 2-voice texture at the beginning to learn how to make melodies at the beginning so it's not so chordal? Do you think that's also a valuable thing to try practicing?
I think so. In fact, one of my colleagues, esteemed colleagues in the Hague, has a class for that where he gets people just to work a whole year on 2 voices. You know, this is extremely healthy. I think one could do it that way. I just like my attitude is, hey, there's this brilliant book. Let's work on this book, you know, and let's start with 4 voices. It may be a little bit of a jump for certain people. I have some students who have trouble entering that dimension of 4 things you have to follow. And as you know, Nick, the human brain, we know from a neurological point of view, if you read Oliver Sacks and great neuroscientists, it's very difficult for the human brain to follow more than 4 things simultaneously.
Right. And
so I think the better, the quicker you get to do that, the better.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. It is a bit of a plunge. It is a bit of a plunge at the beginning, but personally, I like starting with 4 voices, just because there's Bach chorales, Haydn quartets. There is so much extraordinary music written for four voices. So to answer your question, it's not always easy. I have people who will learn the Dandrieu. I happen to work with Dandrieu, so let's talk about Dandrieu. Right. They will learn the Dandrieu in maybe a month, and others in a year. And that doesn't mean they're dumb or anything, It's just that they need more time to organize, to develop that capacity to follow four voices, and to understand how they organically interact, and what their finality is in this horizontal dimension we're talking about.
When you start with that many voices, is it true that is a great stepping stone to composing, like you mentioned, quartets, orchestral things, because you already know how the voices behave when you're handling so many voices at the beginning. So when you're practicing composing, you instinctively know better if you start with four voices.
Well, all great composers, the ones I deal with 17th and 18th century, but even later, were fascinated by thorough bass. Thorough bass is actually, many thorough bass schools are called schools of composition. Composition starts with thorough bass.
Right.
There's no doubt about that. But even take Mozart. I just love the way the continuo in his Requiem. It's written so brilliantly. You could feel that he was somebody who that's how he learned. I mean, he probably learned with Riepel's book, and Riepel is the man we owe Fonte Monte Ponte to.
Right.
And that's because Leopold. It was the same. I think the link was because Leopold, Mozart's father, had contacts in Regensburg. He was exactly of that generation as Riepel. But Mozart learned with Riepel, and Mozart must have learned basso continuo, must have learned thorough bass at a very, very early age. And Haydn. I mean, when I read through or listen to a Haydn quartet or a Haydn symphony, I hear all the basso continuo behind there. I hear those four voices. Take any random symphony by Haydn. Everything can be reduced to four voices, because the oboes, the horns, the flutes, and the bassoons, and all that, they'll be doubling. They'll be just doubling. Or if you have solos, well, then you'll have less texture in the. We're always talking four voices, and a fifth if you have double consonants, of course.
Can we turn to? Oh, so please go ahead.
And just for one last point, not even that, because if you have the double consonants of the seven and the seven and the nine, for instance, you don't necessarily need the fifth. So I have a nice exercise for anybody who's watching. For you, Nikhil, if you want.
Yes, please. I want it.
It's going up a scale, so you need to start really low with your left and really high with your right. So let's say in D major, and you start and you go up by step, and you play 7 nines. Resolve. This is extremely healthy for double consonances, but I'll be. This is almost not doable if you're going to do it in 5 voices. That's the point I wanted to make. Yeah, you see, we always come back to 4 voices. If you have double consonances, you need to get rid of one of the consonants. Double dissonances, sorry, you need to get rid of one of the consonants.
I want to dive.
Sorry, you wanted to.
I wanted to talk about counterpoint, and we were kind of leaning there, and of the written kind that perhaps takes place in conjunction or with the study of thorough bass at the same time or after thorough bass. How do you think somebody should learn counterpoint? And actually, people have started to introduce solfeggio or the Italian hexachordal way is an interesting way that historically they might have done it at the Neapolitan school. There's also, just counterpoint, studying Fuchs, this very respectable way that people learn counterpoint. How do you think someone should learn counterpoint?
Well, there are different ways of seeing this. Indeed, if you look at the Neapolitan school, I would say that hardcore counterpoint was not the very first thing people started with. Indeed, it was solfeggi, and starting with simpler structures, and certainly Partimento, the study of counterpoint, was later. I believe I like doing this simultaneously. So my students who will indeed get going on Dandrieu, in order to reinforce this, because again, harmony is derived from counterpoint. But I believe that one can learn the fundamentals of counterpoint and learn practical counterpoint, so that people can just do just a little thing like that. I believe that in order to do that, you need to get going. Again, I see it from a practical point of view. You want to learn something? Get yourself a good book on how to do it. A user-friendly book. And the user-friendly book I recommend is the Girolamo di Ruta's Il Transilvano, which he was a Venetian. Well, it was published in Venice. Whether he was a Venetian, I can't remember, but it's set in Venice, and it is the wonderful dialogue between Daruta. Oh no, he was from Perugia. Yeah, there you go. And he was Perugino. He was from Perugia, and it is a discussion between a master and a Slovenian, and in fact, whether Slovenian or Croatian, well, he was from the Balkans, gentleman, Il Transilvano, and they have this discussion. It is so touching. You have to. I don't know if you've read this. I don't know if you've read this.
Never.
But even the first the introduction is wonderful. It starts by Il Transilvano saying, "It has been a very difficult night. I was so excited about my first lesson with Master Daruta that I hardly slept." And then Daruta says, "Oh, but I have to tell you, sir, because Transilvano is an
aristocrat. Oh, right.
Aristocrat. I have to tell you, sir, that I didn't sleep a wink either, because the prospect of having you, such a great man, a noble musician, as my student the next day, just took all my sleep away." So here you have these two guys who are completely wrecked. They haven't slept, and they embark into counterpoint. How absurd is this?
Yeah.
I like. If you want to show a few pages from this,
let's do it.
Daruta it's very user friendly. Well, he will explain what are they, first of all, what are you allowed to do? Well, he'd talk about, perfect consonances, imperfect consonances, dissonances. What are the steps you're allowed to do? What are the ones you're not allowed to do? He makes a distinction between contrapunto osservato, which is the more strict kind, or comune, where you're sort of allowed to, you have a little bit more leeway. This particular page here you're showing is absolutely fantastic. It's about 12 or 13 or 14 different ways of accompanying a cantus firmus. He will introduce a cantus firmus, indeed, and that's what we're going to work on. indeed here it is a hexachord. Otherwise, in the preceding pages, it's just a sort of random cantus firmus, as you see here, indeed. So it's about, yes. Yeah, etc., etc., etc. And how do you accompany that? And indeed, here, yes. Etc., etc. And here, free. This is what you do. This is what you do. And then it gets then indeed in this page it gets a little bit more little bit tricky. Yeah, this is an essential page. This is an essential note against note, two notes against one note, and then it gets more tricky here with three voices, and then these cadences. He's obsessed with cadences. These are not at all. He just says you need cadences at some point. You can't just go on and on and on doing
right.
counterpoint. You need to put punctuation in there, and you need cadences. And he gives us examples, these wonderful cadences by Fattorini, a contemporary, who, and I really like that. What I also like about this is that there are a few little things which are here and there which are not quite correct. I like that. In Dandrieu, by the way, there are a few pages where with mistakes or things which are. For instance, if he'll do where you have parallel fifths. I can't. There's a moment where you have these parallel fifths within the middle voices.
In the middle voices, right. And some people have said that that's okay, right? Is that okay?
It's okay. I mean, there's some by Bach. Bach wrote them in his old Orgelbüchlein. You have parallel. Here it is. Yes. Did that disturb you, Nikhil?
No.
Can you? Yeah. You can sleep at night with this. Can't you? There's a middle in the middle voice, but it's extraordinary when they're in the middle. You don't hear them. And. You could argue about that because you won't. Bach would not have done that. I think he would have been a little bit more careful with.
My ears are not so sensitive at this point. I mean, it's getting better, but maybe who knows?
Yeah. But anyway, so to come back, Daruta, I highly recommend Daruta, and I'll get my students to study Daruta in parallel with continuo. So we'll do this stuff, and again, it could be Fuchs. A lot of my colleagues admire Fuchs.
Yep.
I remember. I think Derek Remish saying in your show that he's quite a Fuchs admirer, if I remember correctly.
Right.
You have different views. There is a French school by Antoine Parent, which I have here. Which have you ever heard of him? I didn't hear about Bach until about 2 years ago, and it's an extraordinary book, and I'm looking forward to spending some time on that. It's it's on my to-do list. So I will do that, and of course, we have to do Partimento.
Right. So that could be a good segue into Partimento. When did you discover it, Patrick, and when did you integrate it into your teaching?
I discovered this through Bob Jerdingen's book, Music in the Gallant Style. I had never heard about it before. At one point I needed some. I got a bit stuck, as I said to you. I got a bit stuck in my teaching of improvisation, because for me there was a missing link. I have to tell you, I have this sort of 4-column vision, the 4 columns, or the 4 pillars, you could call it. First of all, when you learn pieces, don't you? You know, as a kid,
right.
you learn little pieces. You know, that was the first piece I learned.
Christian Petzold, right?
Exactly. Very good.
Most people think it's Bach.
Yes, not Bach. Yes, not Bach. It's like Bist du bei mir is not by Bach, one of the most famous soprano arias. But anyway, you learn pieces. And in fact, so you've got all the information on the page, don't you? You've got notes there, and you play those notes. And you do the best you can to interpret them, you know. And now the next column or pillar would be basso continuo, or thorough bass, where you have a bass and you have information or not, you have figures or not. And there's a top line, but that top line you're not going to play. The instrument, an instrument will play that, a flute or a violin or whatever, or maybe it's something vocal, and you have a singer, and you could sing it, or someone else can sing it, but you're going to play the bass, and you're going to play a number of voices above that, and that's called basso continuo. For me, the next step, and that was the missing link, and that it was so extraordinary when I discovered this. It was an absolute revelation. It changed my life. I can really say that. Is a bass, but there's nothing above. There's no line to accompany. You are to provide that. Either with one voice, or two voices. Creating the trio sonata, which I find the very best way of doing Partimento. By the way, I think three voices is the ideal way for all kinds of reasons we can discuss. But so there you see you have even less information. You hit in basso continuo. You have not always, but you generally see the line you accompany, but you don't play it. You accompany that line with a bass which is figured or unfigured.
Right.
In Partimento, you have a bass which is figured or unfigured, but you have to provide the lines. Right. And then the next step, the next column and last of my 4 columns is nothing at all. No more bass, blank page, and that's improvisation. Yep. So this missing link, you see, Nick, this missing link for me between the 2 first columns and the 4th column was indeed was indeed missing in my perspective, in the way I saw our trade as keyboardists. To be honest, and this is not a criticism at all towards my teachers, but in Holland, no one had ever told me about Partimento. Nobody. I never heard about it. And then I went to Switzerland to brush up my. I went to see Rudy Lutz. I mentioned a little bit earlier, and I went to see how he teaches improvisation in Basel.
Are you two friends?
Yeah, we're quite close. Yeah, we haven't seen each other, of course, for a long time. There was Corona and all that. Yep. But we saw quite a lot of each other in those years. I'd say up to about 3, 4 years ago. I invited him to my festival here in France, and I went to Switzerland a few times. I visited him at his home and met his lovely wife, and we're good friends. I owe him massively because he gave me ideas on how to restructure my class in The Hague. And he said, Patrick, I can give you a few ideas, but there are a few books you need to write to read. And one of them, which I consider, for which I have enormous respect, is Music in the Gallant. And that's how I discovered Partimento. But the other day, I was talking to Peter von Tour, and his discovery of Partimento, I was quite surprised. I mean, he wrote an extraordinary book on Partimento and Counterpoint. His discovery is also rather recent. Right. If you look at it from the point of view of, so, yes, here's Rudy playing. I recommend. I recommend a very good. It's a YouTube, but there's no picture. It's just sound. He's playing at the Improvisation Festival in Lausanne, Switzerland, and he plays something. He's an improvisation called Mr. Bach Goes to New York, something like that, or Mr. Bach Goes Down to Texas. And I highly recommend it. Extraordinary pianist, organist, conductor, pedagogue, now retired and spending a lot of time recording all the Bach cantatas.
Yeah, Mr. Bach in New York, that's right.
Yeah, that's a cool one. I recommend it. I recommend it, but that's one out of many. So yeah, Rudy.
How did he teach that, and what pointers did you get from observing him?
Oh well, I just like I remember I watched 3 or 4 lessons. One was on what was it? Again, one there was a lot of discussion about Fonte Monte Ponte, a lot of that. There was a lot of Partimento, a lot of this discussion about, indugio, the kind of cadences you're going to learn, use, whether you're in a cantizans or a tenorizans or altizans or bassizans, this kind of stuff. So quite analytical. So getting down to the molecular side of it. And this was precisely what was lacking in my own approach. Although I'd started doing Dandrieu, Daruta, I needed some more information. I felt a little bit limited. And the Jellingen's approach and Rudy Lutz's approach, and then I met Rudy's wonderful former students who've become now teachers, Nicolas Kummer, Markus Schwenkreis, who I admire enormously. And as you know, Nick, they have published an extraordinary book on improvisation.
Is that the giant, the compendium, right? That's right.
Massive book, and I've been in touch with Markus Schwenkreis because we're going to have to get down and get this book translated into English big time and soon. It is an extraordinary book with covers all the fundamental aspects of improvisation. Here it is, indeed.
Right, Markus.
Markus came to The Hague to give a course 2 years ago, and very kindly offered it to me. So I would, to answer your question, different angles, depending on the levels. I mean, one of Rudy's students was very good at improvising fugues. So, so off you go. Here's a theme, get going. And so what you do with that? Now that is obviously not first year or second year or even third year materials, maybe something here. But Nick, one has to start building up on that. So how you can't say, again, I'm trying to avoid precisely that kind of sort of that attitude which I found so strange. Continuo, very hard, isn't it? Not just for the chosen few. You have to have three brains for that or whatever. No, I think fugal improvisation can be learned, but you just have to start doing a lot of expositions. Just simple expositions, and for that I recommend the wonderful Pasquini versetti. Pasquini's versetti. They are absolutely extraordinary. Just a fugue theme could be just this. That's it. And so it would be. And builds up bit by bit. It is published in Italy. The publishing house is Andromeda, and I highly recommend this as preparation for fugues.
I was surprised that I'm so new to early music. I had no idea that they thought of fugues in terms of figured bass and in terms of and I for some reason I just thought that it was strictly a written counterpoint thing. But so my mind was blown when I heard that people were using basso continuo to improvise fugues.
Completely. And Partimento fugues are very useful. Handel wrote a fugue. He wrote a bunch, 6 or 7 for the little princesses he taught. I use that as well. I don't think I have the book here. It can't be very far. Excuse me disappearing like that, but
I found the Versetti.
So the Versetti I really recommend. If you want to learn how to do an exposition, a fugue exposition, if you want to learn, and of course you're going to learn by assimilation, by absorbing, by analysis of what's going on in these little Versetti. They're obviously for me, I have absolutely no doubt, I'm 100% sure they are pedagogic pieces. They're for people how to learn composition. Like so many, take the 2-part inventions by Bach. In the preface, he says these are good pieces for learning composition.
Yeah, can you explain why he means that? Now, a lot of people play these. I recently obtained a Urtex copy of this. Now, if somebody buys this, they start practicing it, they're learning it. How do you take the material and turn it into something didactic in terms of learning composition?
Well, again, it's analysis, isn't it? Here they are. You take anyone. Take the very first one. In C major, well, you have. If you take the first few bars, you learn immediately about imitation, don't you? You're also learning about fugue, aren't you? It's a fugue in the unison or the octave, if you could call it that way. You learn, and then you're going to learn about modulation, because as soon as an F sharp appears, you've modulated to the dominant. Yeah. The structural, you can learn about even the role of the octave. Cadences. Ornamentation. So a page like this contains so much information, and it does take quite some time until you can teach this, I must say. I'm not, again, I have to say this with as much modesty as I can, but it did take me some years until I had the capacity of saying, look, to a student, look at this page and tell me what's happening in here. And then if the student has trouble, being able to say, look at this, look at this, look at this. But again, I needed Partimento for this. Not knowing about Partimento was I felt blocked at one point. Because when the bass had a certain behavior, going down 5, up 4, going up 3, down 1, whatever, I didn't quite know what was happening there. I knew that it was a sequence, but I didn't know that this was part of a whole school of teaching music and of singing, of composition.
Two quick questions, Patrick. The first is, can someone who started late in life, and I know what you're going to say, but can somebody who started late in life learn how to improvise?
Very, very, absolutely. Provided they go through the pillars, my pillar system, or whatever, what I was talking about. I think you need to improvise. You need to play pieces. You need to know what there is out there. And this is very interesting, by the way. Markus Schwenkheis and his colleagues in the compendium talk about a lot about that and cite many good sources of German composers who mention the importance of studying die guten Autores. As you know, in the 18th century in German, they use a lot of Latin words. And so you had the good composers. You need to stick to the good composers and look what they are doing in order to be to improvise.
Right.
But again, you need column 2 or pillar 2. You need basso continuo and counterpoint, and you need Partimento. You need to be versed in that capacity of bit by bit taking information away from the page.
Right.
So if I have this page, but basically that first bar, I could harmonize it, or I could just consider it's one bar of C major. It's one C major, and the next bar is a G major. It's just a G major. I could use even this bass. Oh, that's interesting. 3 down, 1 up. I mean, if you take out of the Baroque style, there wouldn't be any music left.
Right.
So I think, again, music and analysis, just spending one page. And indeed, one of the lessons Rudy taught, I remember, he spent, I think, about an hour and a half on one page from a Bach trio sonata for organ. Can't remember which one it was. This was in one of the, we went to the local church there near the Schola Cantorum, and he's teaching. And the way he just pulled this to pieces, like, you're just taking everything apart.
Yeah.
And showing how some things are definitely, the ramifications are clear from counterpoint, others from just simple, harmony approach, others from Partimento.
Yeah.
It's just quite extraordinary.
Another question I have is, how do you get better at reading so-called archaic clefs? So clefs that are not in use now. So for instance, some of the manuscripts are in soprano clef, and some people are able to read 4 clefs at the same time. Is there any advice to get better at reading?
Very good question. My advice is just get yourself a good whip and whip yourself. I felt frustrated at one point. I thought, oh God, my clef reading is not so good. And when I started conducting late in life, I never wanted to be a conductor until one day there was a large ensemble and someone said, who's going to give the upbeat? And I said, well, I'll try. And I gave it, and they said, oh, well, that was pretty clear, and then I later developed a kind of specialty. I conduct now and then modern orchestras who are interested in earlier repertoire, and so it's a way of teaching, teaching them about style and this and that. But then you have to, to be able to read clefs, don't you? If you want to know what the horns are doing, or what the trumpets are doing, or what the violas are doing, and some other instruments, or the English.
So it's just suffering then. You just do it.
I'm sorry to say, you just have to do it. And my method is that there are 2 ways. You just read Art of the Fugue. You do it 1 counterpoint a day. And you just do it slowly, bar by bar, until with control. And what you can do at the same time is read some Frescobaldi, for instance, the Fiori Musicali, which are not too difficult. Or if you're feeling a bit more hearty and courageous, you could try the Capricci. But those are a little bit more difficult. So I'd say just do or give yourself 1 page. I have here the Capricci next to my harpsichord, Frescobaldi's Capricci, and I do 1 page a day just to keep fit. Again, I'm talking about the days where I'm at home and I'm not too busy and running around. But I do. But if I am running around, if I have, say, I'm in The Hague, I have a free hour, or if it's the morning of a concert I'm going to conduct in the evening, and there's a piano, I'll just sit down, open my iPad, and just do one page.
Okay.
Or I will analyze. I'll play one versetto by Pasquini, just to work on my on fugal exposition. I'm not talking about the whole fugue. If for complete fugues with development, with exposition, development, and all that, I recommend the Magnificat fugues by Pachelbel. They are absolutely extraordinary.
Do you have any comment on modern music theory? Does that have any influence on you in the way that you look at 17th or 18th century?
I must admit that I'm not at all a specialist of that. So it's a quick answer to. I don't know very much about Schenkerian analysis. I don't know. I'm not very much versed into that. To my regret, as I said, I'm struggling to learn jazz theory right now, and in order to be a little bit more at ease with that. But I know I'm not such a specialist in that field.
Fair enough. Now, I love the interview that you were talking about some of Bach's pieces on YouTube. It is a very beautiful short video of you. I think you were playing a prelude and fugue, and I love Bach too. I think he's amazing. And so for the Well-Tempered Clavier, can you just comment on it and just tell me what you think about it as a didactic source, as repertoire? How important is it for people to learn 18th century music? Is it I know people have said it might be a bit extreme. You might want to go for some simpler pieces, but maybe Fischer or some other things, because Bach is kind of, super. There's a lot of stuff going on. But I'd love to hear your commentary on it. I know you love Bach, and you've been playing Bach your whole life. So I'd love to hear what you have to say about Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier and his keyboard works, the inventions, the sinfonias, the suites, the partitas.
I love your question, because I have on my harpsichord all the time the two books, and book 1 and book 2 of the Well-Tempered Clavier, which I discovered rather late. I started playing the suites. We know from Carl Philipp that Bach introduced this quite early in the pedagogic plan for his students. I think it was Hans von Bülow who said that that these two books are the Old Testament of music.
And the Beethoven sonatas of the New Testament, right? That's what he said.
That's right. That's right. Yes, great. I had forgotten that one. Yeah, exactly. You're perfectly right. No, well, the extraordinary thing.
Because knowing what you know now about Partimento and thorough bass, and has that changed a little bit how you look at these pieces that you've probably been playing your whole life? For
sure. I mean, the very first prelude is an introduction to thorough bass, isn't it? It's an introduction to one of the most common opening gambits. It's so obvious. Resolution, etc. No, the diversity of these two books is, unfathomable. It is so colossal. You have so many different styles, from very strict counterpoint to 2-voice fugues via 5-voice writing, all kinds of different. Almost every school is there. Italian music, German music, of course, French music, pieces in the French style. I would say this is the daily bread of every I was going to say pianist, harpsichordist, organist, but I would say every musician, I know not everybody can play a keyboard instrument. Some violinists, some people don't play keyboard, but to know what's going on in what's going on here. Now, I would not recommend the Well-Tempered Clavier as a source for studying fugue. Don't start with that. And indeed, I join you on, you mentioned Fischer, and again, Pachelbel. Go for that kind of stuff if you want to learn improvisation. If you don't want to learn improvisation, don't start with this. Because these are absolute gems which have been chiseled over by one of the greatest composers who ever lived. And I would say you can learn, of course, so much about composition, yes, harmony, yes, counterpoint, style, ornamentation, but don't try and improvise. I mean, if you can do it as well as it is here, well, good for you. But no, I would not use this as. I would use a lot of Pachelbel. Now, Pachelbel, when I was an organ scholar, people said, "Oh, Pachelbel, boring, weak, not so interested in music." But no, his fugues, his Magnificat fugues are extraordinary. His preludes, his toccatas, yes. This is my daily bread, and in fact, I'll tell you what I do. My if I'm home and I've got to stay an hour or two for my personal practice, what do? I'll do a little bit of warm up, see if my fingers are still working. I'll play through one prelude and fugue in one key, a key a day, and just to see, am I still okay with F sharp, C sharp major? I have, one a day, and tomorrow I'll do. C sharp minor, and there's I like this. I like the aspect of one key a day. One key a day. So I'll play this. Sometimes I will play it just for the pleasure of playing it.
Yeah.
Sometimes I will play it in a completely analytical way. So I will just think, as I'm playing through this, what is he doing? What is he doing? What is he doing? Why did he do that? Oh yes. So just following it as if it was a detective story. That's what I'll do. I will analyze and play one Pachelbel fugue. I'll do a few Fenaroli's, a few from later books, just to see, maybe a Partimento fugue. I will do my page of clef readings, either from Art of the Fugue, just one a day, keeps the doctor away, as they say. I'll do from the Capricci. I'm looking down here because I've got quite a lot of music here under me here. I will look. Another book which I absolutely adore is Spiridionis. Do you know Spiridionis?
I've heard the name, but not this book.
These are extraordinary. 2 volumes of. This is real impro stuff. Learning, and this is, by the way, comparable to Franz Elson's jazz theory book. Franz Elson talks about voice leading. So do this, you can do this, you can do that, you can do this, you can do this. And here, Spiridionis was a monk who just sat down one day and decided, I'm gonna write as many different kinds of cadences, for instance, 5/1. So if we have this, so doppia cadence, he writes different ways. So you could do, or you can do with more activity in the tenor, or you can do with syncopations, or you can do something with a flourish in the soprano. Or you can do something in 3. Or you can do contramotion. And this goes on pages and pages and pages. Spiridionis al Monte Carmelo. I really recommend this. And I will do a page. And this is memorization. So I will just adding stuff to my
You talked about keys a day. Do you have any advice on being more fluent in, because it's such a slog to do something in all keys, 3 positions. Do you have any advice to break that up?
You mean in terms of
for instance, if you learn a nice cadence from the Spiridoni, do you transpose it? Do you learn it in that particular key?
Definitely take one. But here again, Franz Elsen in his jazz theory book, or any other jazz theory book, please transpose this in all keys. I'll tell you a funny story, a true story, told by Daniel Barenboim when he was a piano student in Paris. Was it with Nadia Boulanger? I think it was, or Cortot. I can't remember with whom he studied. But he was, as you know, he studied piano in Paris. He was given the Well-Tempered Clavier. And then sometimes his teachers said, could you play this? It was maybe the C sharp, C minor. Could you play this in A minor?
Oh, no.
Or could you play it in F minor?
Right.
So I'll do an easy one, you know. I'm playing it in E major now, but that's easy. But I don't think it's very easy to play C sharp major fugue. Well, say I don't know the A major fugue book 1 in C sharp major, and that takes a certain skill. But transposition. We've lost that. We've lost this capacity. Even Frescobaldi complains about that. He says, "Oh, nowadays people are getting lazy with transposition." It's even Frescobaldi is bitching about that, you know. And so
this is just an aside, Patrick. It's very funny. I remember this is in Singapore, and there was a singer who was complaining about all these keyboardists. Now, you know, on digital pianos, you can transpose any key just to the white keys. So these keyboardists are so lazy. Just take any song. They set it to E flat, but they're actually just playing the white keys. So
I know. There are all kinds of tricks to transposition is something. I mean, I admire the jazz guys and girls who transpose. I really admire that because they have kept that Olympic flame alive of transposition, and we are very bad at that. Even in Vienna, I went to Vienna.
But what's the level of transposition we need? I mean, being able to do the Well-Tempered Clavier at any key, that sounds intimidating.
Yeah, that sounds intimidating. Surely, I'm not going to ask my students to be able to do that. That's pushing it maybe a little bit far.
But if our culture was a different type of culture where that is obsessively thought about, I've heard stories that people took the Hanon, for instance, and they were doing the exercises in different keys as well. So what do you think would be a good level of transpositional ability?
I think one should be able to transpose from say a piece with no sharps, no flats, to transpose it to a key with 4 sharps, 4 flats. Up to there. Okay? I think that would be that's at least what I try to ask my students. 3 or 4 flats or 3 or 4 sharps. And again, it's just daily work. It's just daily work, daily ablutions, what I call ablutions. You know, you sit down. There's so much to do. You know, that's why I've got my little jogging. I've got my little sort of my little parcours, as one says here in France. My little I'll go there, I'll do that. Maybe not always in the same order, but I like it. I find it really refreshing for me. I'm sort of I've entered the sort of latter part of my career. I feel that I still have something to say in music. In 7 years, I'll be retired. I feel I need to do that. I need to do it even more than when I was in my 20s. In my 20s, I was just discovering stuff and everything. Things were coming to me. And now I've decided what my priorities are. And again, Nick, the discovery of Partimento was so essential, was such an incredible milestone for me. And not a day goes by without being grateful to Rudy, but also to people I've never met, like Bob Jerningen, for that discovery. I think this is a very exciting time we are living through right now. Very exciting.
I had a quick question. Do you know a Professor Karst de Jong? I think he was associated with the Hague.
Karst de Jong teaches the Hague. We have met fleetingly here and there, but I know who he is, and he's a wonderful improviser and great one of our very fine teachers and pedagogues. He knows his stuff. Yeah, he does. Karst de Jong, has he been on your show? I think he has.
He's even in Singapore. I mean, he's done something. That's why I was mentioning that connection. Right. And so, okay. And also
where you are originally, Nick. Okay, yeah. Okay.
So to wrap up now, Professor Ayrton, one thing I want to ask you is maybe just the final question: where do you see the change? Maybe you could reflect on the changes in music education of the last number of years, and where do you see it moving forward in the next 5-10 years? Particularly, I just want to restrict it to 18th and 17th century music, and just to see where you see it is, and just in this particular area in early music.
Well, again, I'd like to maybe go back to a few things we were talking about earlier in today's in our meeting. There was a time when people considered basso continuo like something really, really daunting, and then people started reading treatises and then applying them in a very practical and hands-on way, and people learned continuo. And then came Partimento. It took some time, Sanguinetti's book, Rudolf Lutz's research, Jerdingen's book, and then now people are playing decent Partimento, very decent, and we have some great Partimentists. And improvisation was the same thing. Oh my God, improvising a suite. A few years ago, I decided I wanted to just do that in concerts. I thought, okay, there's Niedt. There's this wonderful source. I'm going to use it. I'm going to learn how to do this. And indeed, in my concerts, I do a kind of, I ask the audience, what do you want to hear? Give me a menu, sarabande, menuet. Now, give me a key, and I'll try and do something for you. And I do this regularly. But again, I had to sort of whip myself to get myself to do this, to go out there and do this. And I think, who do we have to thank? Well, we have to thank so many great scholars, so many great musicologists who've gone out there to look for the information, all this information which we have now, and which we didn't have 20 years ago, which we certainly didn't have when I started my career teaching as a pedagogue in The Hague. And the way I see it, Nick, is that we're going. I mean, even though when one looks at the world, and global warming and on so many issues, and sometimes you feel so depressed about how things are going. I certainly don't feel that concerning the trade of the subjects we've been talking about today. I think people are becoming brilliant continuo players, brilliant partimentists, and very, very accomplished improvisers. And we have, as I said, we have a wealth of material now. We've discovered primary sources. There's a wealth of secondary sources, even tertiary sources. And I think it will be quite a different thing in 10 years, 15 years, the next generation. I certainly think that the next generation will be, say, a random harpsichordist, organist will be able to improvise a prelude and fugue, no problem, either in French style or the German style. I'll give you a little example. A friend of mine teaches thoroughbass, Partimento, and improvisation in Geneva. He's got 11-year-olds who are improvising fugues.
Wow, that's wonderful.
He's got 11, 10, 11-year-olds. And why do they do this? Not because they've got a special brain, not because they are, more intelligent than not because of that, because they've just done they've gone towards improvisation through what I was telling you about, the 4 columns. They've learned pieces, analyzed them. They've learned counterpoint, rudiments of counterpoint and harmony. They've learned Partimento. And with that, you're ready to sail in the wide world of improvisation, because you've got the luggage, you've got the technology, you've got your tool box is full, and you add now and then a tool, or you take one out which you feel is maybe not so necessary. And I think we are in this extraordinary process, and as I'm sort of going towards the end of my work in the Hague, and as I said, in 7 years, I feel more and more excited. I feel more and more excited about what were huge challenges, still remain challenges, but we found now ways of how to make this our daily bread.
Yep.
And make it less daunting than it needs to be.
Is there a big increase in interest in Partimento? Have you seen any big interest?
Enormous. But just the fact that your show exists, Nick. Just the fact that there's that, when I can't remember when you started the show, but I was there, and then there's this Partimento group on Facebook, and there's this and that. This doesn't exist a few years ago. This is a recent development.
A lot of students mentioning it, new students coming in. Is it starting to become something that is there's a general awareness that this exists?
Absolutely. Some of my ex-students who are fantastic improvisers, and who they the other day said, there's this cool guy in America who's got a show on Partimento, talking about you, and I said, yeah, things are moving.
I actually want I want to squeeze in one more question, which is, now you are a master of early music. Can I ask you a question that perhaps is not quite related, but related to music, which is, with your training, now I know you're interested in jazz, but when you're walking down the street in the mall, before COVID, and if you heard popular music, you heard contemporary music of the 20th and 21st century, do you feel like, now I know people use modern music theory to analyze this stuff, pop music and that sort of thing, but do you feel a basso continuo operating system is relevant for popular music? Do you feel that there's an overlap there? Do you see so in the sense that, I certainly do think that's the case, but do you see that there's, when you hear something on the radio, you're like, I can hear, it's not the same language, but I can hear something that I can understand, perhaps in the way I interpret things?
It is so funny, Nick, that you're asking me this question, because I'm here at home with my youngest daughter, who's 24, and she's writing her thesis. She studied, first of all, history of art in Cambridge, and then went on doing sort of general management, sort of a compressed master in 1 year in London. And she's writing a thesis, and she's almost finished, but she's sitting on the terrace today listening to the Beatles. While I was sort of writing emails and listening to Abbey Road, and I was enjoying so much listening to this music, which I listened to a lot when I was a teenager. But now listening to it, I swear to you, Nick, the whole time I was thinking, Romanesca, tenor cadence, Fonte, Fonte, and I find this thrilling because these terms, these devices are timeless. Certainly, if you look at our, shall we say, timeless in the sense, well, I don't know where music composition is going, and I'm not at all a specialist of modern music theory, nor am I a specialist of contemporary music. I know some 20th century music, but certainly not. But if we consider music from, say, 1600 to 1850, it's basic. All these. We're talking the same molecules, the same structures, the same. We're always talking. Take a Mendelssohn symphony, take even a Brahms symphony, to Brahms 4, the final movement, based on Cantata 150. As you maybe know, it is extraordinary. The chaconne. So instead, Bach does. That's your chaconne. But Brahms does more, changes a little bit, but we're talking the same building blocks, and it was very amusing today. So what you're describing, walking through a mall and hearing this music and wondering whether. And yeah, I spent quite a lot of time today analyzing the Beatles and listening to it, and then thinking, wow, how creative they were, how inventive they were, how fresh this music still is, and with the ears of again, someone who's delved for quite some years in harmony and counterpoint and Partimento and improvisation, you rediscover this music and it again it stays so fresh and new, as if it had been composed yesterday, and yet this was composed in the 60s or beginning of the 70s.
Well, what can I say? I mean, it's been a really wonderful conversation with you, Professor Ayrton, and to end off, would you be able to tell my audience some upcoming projects you have, and please plug anything you'd like to mention, and anything you're working on?
Well, you're kind enough, I think, to mention my little kit. I don't know if we talked about my kit, but I have this little how to save your life in kit, where I've sort of brought this down to the most simple and fundamental elements you need. So what do you need? You need a bit of counterpoint. You need harmony, rule of the octave. You need to know what the other sonorities are. So that's the one on chaconne Pasquini, but there's one also called kit, basic impro kit. That's it. And you need to know a few cadences. You need to know your moti del basso, and you need to know a little bit about fonte monte ponte. With that, you can go far. You can go far.
No parallel.
So yeah. That's right. So basically, you can, with this little kit, which again, it's just a very modest. In French they say "ça vaut ce que ça vaut." It's worth what it's worth. My immediate plan is that, because I'm going to teach continuo, I'm going to teach impro almost every month in the city of Poitiers for advanced students here in France, and I need to just have this translated into French. So that's my next thing. So very basic thing. I'm going to sit down. Actually, tomorrow I have to translate my kit into French. Otherwise, no, things are starting again. It's been a actually quiet summer for me. I haven't done very much. Just did a few things. I did go up to Holland to do some improvisation. Some friends of mine who have a wonderful group called Camerata Trajectina in Utrecht did a concert which is an homage to Sveling, because it is a Sveling year with a Sveling, Jan Pieterszoon Sveling commemoration. So I tried to improvise a little bit in his style. Then I have to go up to The Hague for some teaching. I'm going to teach in the Ton Koopman Academy for 10 days. Ensemble coaching and stuff like that. So things are picking up. Yeah, again, after a break, and of course, Corona has affected us all. Probably affected you, Nick, in your own personal work. A lot of my teaching is online. Of course, I do go on teaching, but what I like teaching online is the technical side of Counterpoint, Partimento, thorough bass. I find it much more difficult to teach ensemble, of course, online. So I will, now that we can move more freely, I will be up in The Hague and other places to teach chamber music. And that's what the order book looks like for the immediate future.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for being on the show. I hope you had a good time. And please, we have to do this again. And this has been such an easy conversation for me, and I think you're such a thorough musician. And I really love what you're doing. So I hope my audience checks out that kit and your work. Thank you so much, Patrick. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Nick. Bye-bye. It's been a huge honor and pleasure. Thank you. All the best to you.